On behalf of the Alberta Regional Professional Development Consortium, I would like to extend our deepest appreciation and respect to our Elder Advisory Circle, who helped guide this project and bring it to fruition. Thank you to Elders Tina Fox, Betty Laton, and Eulalia Running Rabbit. Your dedication to education is a tremendous act of reconciliation. We can only hope to bring as much awareness and truth as possible to this day. I would also like to thank my friend and colleague Donna Ross for her huge contribution to this project and for her words about this significant day. Orange Shirt Day, or the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, is a day that remembers the thousands of Indigenous children who attended residential schools and the children who did not make it home from residential schools. As part of the learning of the impact of residential schools, Orange Shirt Day and beyond guides an approach to share the true story, the true history, with educators, students, and school communities. It is a time of remembrance and reflection about the impact it continues to have on many Indigenous peoples. Our Orange Shirt Day and Beyond resources honors, respects, and fosters ways to learn about the legacies of residential schools, but also commemorates Indigenous ways of knowing, doing, relating, and being, by promoting positive stories of hope and resiliency. The guidance of our Elder Advisory Circle has prompted a decolonization framework to share a deepening perspective as their own personal stories of painful memories were shared. In turn, they recommended ways in which we should teach about these important discussions surrounding residential schools and beyond. I'd like to introduce you now to my friend and colleague, Jason Big Charles, who's here with me today to introduce to you a couple of different aspects of Indigenous culture that we can see currently in Alberta.
Hey, Barb, pinanaskumten. Natsakakyaw, papastem si kasun, Jason Big Charles Namunyaw si kasun, East Prairie Jania, pinanaskumten awakakyaw. So thank you, Barb. I'm very grateful to be here. My name is Whitehorse, or Wapastim. My colonized name is Jason Big Charles, and I'm coming to you today from my proud Métis lands in northern Alberta on the East Prairie Métis settlement. And I am very honored to be here with you today, to be asked to join in this journey as we journey together down the road of reconciliation. And as Barb said, we're slowly coming up to the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And as we journey towards that day of celebration and mourning, I'm glad to be a part of your journey in that. Just to talk a little bit about myself, like I said, I grew up, I was born and raised on the East Prairie Métis settlement. And I was brought up very much in a traditional Nihiawiwin or a traditional Cree way of life from an early age. I was sent to stay with my Namusum, my grandfather at an early age, and to learn from both my grandmother and grandfather, the language, the culture, the hunting, the gathering, the ceremonies with them. And in fact, it was on the day that I was sent to return to my parents was actually my first day of school. So it was my grandparents who put me on the bus to go to attend school in the nearby town of High Prairie, Alberta. Tell you that was quite a journey for myself, and very much like Phyllis Webstad with the Orange Shirt Day. There's a lot of trauma that came from that, because at the time I was speaking mainly Cree. Both my grandparents only spoke Cree, so I was very much speaking Cree with them, and then having to head right off to school and enter into a totally whole new world for me. From that time, we had barely been into High Prairie, so I'd barely left my community. But having to go that first day of school was quite a shock for me. And it was not only tearful having to leave my grandparents to go to school and then return back home to my parents, but just going to school was a shock in itself, going into a whole new world to me. At the time, the night before school, I remember my grandfather cutting my hair, and just that was a traumatic experience because I did have my long hair, and I was very proud of my long hair. But in his mind, he didn't want me to be teased at school, and he thought it was going to cause a problem, so he did shave my hair before going to school. So many changes. However, the most traumatic thing for me was when I did get to school. I wasn't there very long before noticing that everyone was speaking English, and I was still trying to come out of that mindset of being a Cree speaker. And although I did speak some English, uh, I hadn't used it in a while, so it was kind of difficult for me to ask for things. One memory in particular sticks in my mind. Uh, that I wasn't in my classroom for very long when I had to go to the washroom. And in our Catholic school at that time, the majority of the teachers were nuns. So of course, my teacher at that time was a nun, and I inadvertently asked to go to the bathroom in Cree, which she immediately jumped up with her meter stick and gave me a little swat and said, "You will not speak that devil's language in this class." So I had forgotten, like I said, I was so used to the Cree that I was trying to find the words to go to the washroom in English, and I couldn't. It kept coming back to the Cree. I think she very much knew what I was asking for, but rather than just letting me go to the washroom, what she did was take two chairs to the front of the room and had me stand on those two chairs. And at that time, I had a classroom with close to 30 classmates, and she had me stand on two chairs in front of the entire class. And she said, "You're going to stand there until you ask properly in English to go to the washroom." So of course I could find the word to say washroom, but I didn't know the rest of it, like asking properly. So of course I stood there on those two chairs, and finally, eventually I did wet myself in front of the whole class. That was my first experience with school, and that very much affected me deeply, even to this day. Because from then on, of course, we were told we can't speak the language. If we did speak the language, we were either hit or our ears were pulled, and we were told not to speak that evil language, and that was very repetitive. So I very much learned quickly to leave the language behind and learn the English language. However, in thinking back now, it still greatly affects me because when I speak my language now, it feels wrong. It feels like I'm doing something wrong. So when we talk about historical trauma and we hear people say, "Oh, that happened a long time ago, forget about it, move on," it's not that easy. I'm a very spiritual person. I'm very I'm a deep thinker, and I pride myself on helping others to heal. But still, that experience from all those many years ago, I can't find the proper way to heal from it myself. So we see how deep the trauma goes. It's not just superficial. It's not just on the outside. It's deep within us. Like I said, even today, when I speak my language, it feels like I'm doing something wrong, and I feel like I'm doing something bad. So I have difficulty in speaking the language. In fact, the only time that I can openly, freely speak the language is in prayer when I'm speaking with my higher power. and I find it easy for me to speak the language then. But as soon as one other person is around, it doesn't feel right. Uh, that experience comes back to me as though it happened yesterday. So we think about those kinds of experiences and the experience of Phyllis Webstad with her orange shirt, and we see how deep trauma runs. Because although Phyllis Webstad had that experience with her orange shirt, and I had my experience just working with elders and those that are healing from historical trauma, elders who have gone to residential school. I find that there are much, um, I guess, more horrible experiences out there than what I went through or that uh, Phyllis had went through. And and then we could start to sort of realize what that trauma really means and how important reconciliation is. So on this day of truth and reconciliation coming up, of course, Barbara had mentioned the whole uh, path to truth, realizing truths before we can move on to reconciliation. Now, this movement has been going on for a long time now, and we can easily see by the headlines coming out today and the stuff that's being talked about in the news, we still haven't completely reached the point of complete truth. And that is where, with the grave sites found on the residential school sites, that truth has not been fully realized yet, even today. Over 10,000 grave sites so far to date, and that continues to rise. In talking with elders and in talking with anyone, I think you're going to find that nowhere in this world, in any society, is it acceptable that there should be grave sites in a schoolyard. And yet, this is the reality that our FNMI peoples have had to endure, having to send their children to school in confidence that they would come back better people, as they were told. And yet, in most cases, or a lot of cases, having their children not return from school. And then hearing the horror stories of residential school survivors of what went on. Now, my mother and a lot of my aunts did attend residential school. My mother attended the Gruard Mission in Gruard, Alberta. And although her experience in her mind wasn't as horrible as some of the other experiences, I think in talking with her, she definitely has some healing to go through herself because in her mind, they weren't horrible experiences, but in hearing them, they are equally traumatic experiences where she talks about the very little food they were given, some of it spoiled, and being told that that's what they would eat, being made to wear burlap sacks as their dresses. That's traumatic for any child. However, my mother doesn't think it was so bad. But then we start to see, I guess, how they were how colonization truly affected people to where they think these things were acceptable when we know now that they were definitely not one bit acceptable. So we start to see how trauma affects people who have been through that trauma. So of course, this whole journey towards truth and reconciliation is very important in the healing of the FNMI people in Canada, because it was not just the First Nations, it was also the Métis and the Inuit people that had to endure the residential schools. Now, like I said, that trauma runs deep, and it's going to take a lot of healing. However, in the past years, we've seen the Truth and Reconciliation and the Orange Shirt Day movement are really coming to light and bringing out those truths. And I feel that we're at the point now where we're almost to the point where the truths are out. We had the current Pope visit uh, recently to give an official apology from the Catholic Church, which is a big movement toward reconciliation. However, if we look here in Canada, we've still got a situation where our Indigenous people, our Métis people, and our Inuit people are still they are searching their own residential school sites and their own lands for these unmarked graves. And when they are found, it is, I guess the government does say, okay, yes, we do have a list of names of students that attended there. And here's the list. So they had all of this all that time, but they were never released. And even to this day, they're still not released. It makes you question why is there withholding of the truth, and leaves little to the imagination that there may be even more traumatic stories that are going to come out in the future over it. Another thing that our nation chiefs have been asking for and still haven't received is an official apology from the RCMP, who played a huge role in the whole residential school system and bringing that whole system, implementing that. I know specifically from experience with my grandfather, he didn't want to send his kids to residential school, and because of it, he was put on warrant he was told he was going to be charged and placed in jail for a long time because he didn't want to send his kids to the residential school. So we see how the RCMP as well played a huge role in that. So like I said, that just shows how far we still need to go in terms of truth. However, events like this are definitely working together towards reconciliation. When we think about reconciliation, we often think that it means the FNMI peoples of Canada have a lot of healing to do, and we have to work through this historical trauma. However, if we really think about reconciliation involves two parties reconciling together. And hopefully that's what we do in learning about